Take one dirty development +4 from quintessential British car manufacturer Morgan Motor Company, one quintessentially cold and potentially wet British day, and one not so quintessential British bloke with a bucket of suds and a video camera, and you've got a somewhat quintessential new car cleaning guru video. So a last minute invite from a few of the guys at Morgan recently saw me take a trip to their newly refurbished facility nestled at the foothills of the Malverns to give their current development +4 model, which had just returned from a 4,000 non-stop mile road test, a bit of TLC. Now, despite the car essentially being brand new, because it had been subjected to the equivalent of 6 months worth of average UK mileage at the dirtiest time of year without a wash was in dire need of one, so thought removing its thick winter veneer of road salt, traffic film, grease and even winter flies would make for some unique cleaning content. Now, as I often am when filming, I was up against it with this one, as following a 3-hour journey down was facing limited daylight hours and the distinct possibility of persistent rain right off the bat. But in addition to that, for certain developmental reasons I can't really go into, was limited to the kinds of cleaning products I could use to actually get the dirt shifted, so either way certainly had my work cut out. Product limitations aside, I thought it made sense to use some familiar British brands on the hand-built British motor, which I hoped would combine to give the car a good restorative chemical decon wash. But before that, I couldn't come all this way and not grab some behind-the-scenes shots of where these quirky things are put together, so took a quick whistle-stop tour of the factory to better understand the car I was about to get my hands on. So each one of Morgan's 3 current models, which all boast bags of classic character as well as modern power-to-weight performance, are handcrafted from the ground up in the workshops that have stood on the site for over a century. It begins with assembly of the main driving components of the car in the chassis shop, then moves on to production of the traditional lightweight ash internal frame in the wood shop, on which the external sheet metal panels which are beaten and bent into shape in the noisy tin shop sit. It's then off to one of multiple paint booths to finish the fully prepped body in pretty much any colour you can think of, before the compact cockpit is lined with leather and whatever other options the customer has chosen in the trim shop, prior to a final pre-delivery inspection under the light so that the car can then be shipped as imperfection-free as possible to its new owner. And while they weren't open to the public at the time of filming, normally offer fully guided factory tours and now have the recently redeveloped Morgan Experience Centre to explore, so highly recommend a visit as there ain't many places like it. So with that whistle-stop factory tour complete, it was time to get back out front to fill the buckets up for a whistle-stop wash using the Autoglym Polar product, which, despite apparently being designed to be used through a pressure washer, still works well when sufficiently frothed up in a bucket. Now, before any contact washing of the body could be performed, there was plenty of pre-cleaning and washing of other parts that had to be completed first, starting with the fussy wire wheels, which were initially sprayed down with a fair bit of Bilt Hamber's Surfex HD, before being left to soak for a few minutes to soften up the wads of grease and grime, prior to a thorough reduced pressure pre-rinse which would hopefully cut through and carry as much of it away as possible. The same all-purpose cleaner degreaser was then reapplied to the wheels plus the inner arches and tyres via a trigger spray, before all areas of the awkward spokes were accessed and worked over with a handful of different detailing brushes and a microfiber wash mitt. Now, to truly clean and detail wheels like these, you'd realistically have to remove them. However, with a few different brushes and some persistence, I was confident I could breathe a certain amount of life back into them and wave goodbye to at least the bulk of the cack contaminating them. The tyre walls and inner arch areas were also given a quick agitation with an appropriate shampoo primed brush, as while I wouldn't have the time or consent to fully detail or dress them, it still made sense to give them a quick once over to pull out any trapped or unseen muck, and once that had been done, everywhere was treated to a thorough rinse to remove the thick pressure washer suds and any freshly dislodged dirt. Now, if cleaning 4 filthy wire wheels against the clock wasn't bad enough, this particular car was carrying an additional one on the back which obviously couldn't be ignored, so was treated in much the same manner. However, it wasn't sporting the same level of caked on road grime and grease as the others were, so thankfully managed to advance to the point where it could be rinsed off so I could crack on with the next stage of the clean a bit quicker. Now, before I could get my hands on the manky body panels, the handcrafted canvas top had to be given a clean, as while it might not have looked very dirty, it had been exposed to the same 4,000 miles worth of winter abuse as the rest of the car, so definitely needed some attention. So after first being lightly rinsed off with the pressure washer, the same Surfex HD used on the wheels was sprayed over its surface before being left to soak. The canvas top was then worked over with a softish shampoo primed long reach brush to simultaneously activate the APC and release any embedded dirt before again being thoroughly pressure rinsed off. With this not being your average runaround, the canvas material also carried over onto the sides of the dainty doors, so before the surrounding painted panels could be cleaned, they were addressed in a similar manner, as due to their lower position on the car were likely dirtier than the top itself. With the wheels, canvas top and exterior door cards given a satisfactory clean, it was then finally time to get to grips with the bodywork, but the rain had unfortunately arrived an hour before it was forecast, so I had to fire up the emergency weatherproof GoPro. So I once again reached for the versatile Surfex HD to quickly saturate the exterior bodywork and break down the thick layer of winter traffic film. Now, with a car this dirty, it's important to pre-clean as thoroughly as possible, as if you simply rinse off and go straight to contact washing, there'll still likely be a fair amount of stubborn and potentially swirl causing dirt on the surface, so you want to remove or at least soften up as much of that as you possibly can, which of course includes a subsequent methodical pre-rinse, which was done a little more mindfully than usual here, making sure not to unnecessarily drive water and product into exposed or delicate parts. So with a pre-clean and pre-rinse complete, I then used some of the Autoglym Polar Blast snow foam I brought along to blanket the body of the Plus 4 to further soak its nooks and crannies and provide some additional lubrication for the contact cleaning. Before washing the car over with a microfiber mitt, I took a super soft shampoo prime synthetic detail brush and worked the suds into and over the various intricate features that a wash mitt alone might not readily be able to access, and that gave the rest of the snow foam the opportunity to further soften up and safely encapsulate any remaining loose dirt. Roof and wheels aside, I then proceeded to give everywhere a thorough 2-bucket contact wash in the rain, which wasn't the pleasant experience it perhaps should have been, but at least I didn't have to worry about suds drying on the surface. Now, despite it only being a small car, its various details and overall design meant that I ended up faffing around with the wash mitt for about as long as I would have if it had been tending to a substantially larger vehicle, which is definitely something to consider before committing to a clean of a car like this. But regardless, I cracked on until all of the Morgan's body panels had been sufficiently worked over with the mitt before moving on. Now, because the wet weather was doing a decent job of naturally dispersing the suds, decided to grab the Purple Rain product from Autobrite Direct for a quick fallout removal, instead of pressure rinsing the suds off first like I usually would. So following a liberal application in the rain, which was arguably a bit pointless, let it sit on the surface until I could at least see some light bleeding so I could justify a further application. So as I say, the rain was inevitably going to dilute the product down a bit on the surface and make it somewhat less effective. However, instead of simply rinsing off, took a brand new general purpose towel, primed that with the fallout remover and gently worked it over the paintwork, just to try and make the process that little bit more thorough and give the surface a slightly deeper clean, as aside from being dried it wouldn't be getting a great deal more after this. Following that chemical towel decon, the car was then snow foamed over one last time to help disperse and neutralise any heavy chemical residue and remaining bits of unseen dirt, as it just doesn't seem right to apply a strong acid based product like a fallout remover, then go straight onto drying after just a rinse with water. So once it had been allowed to soak, one final methodical pressure rinse was undertaken to remove as much of the remaining dirt and product residue as possible before leaving it there for the wet work, as both me and the car were completely sodden through and so desperately needed to seek some shelter. With a few Morgans moved about off camera and my hat sufficiently wrung out for round 2, it was time to dry the car, first using a plush item from Autobrite Direct to safely absorb the bulk of the standing rinse water before the more finicky details could be addressed. Once the absorbent towel had been worked over the majority of the wet panels, including the sodden canvas roof, which unfortunately for some reason I forgot to film, the Metro mini blower was additionally employed to drive out any trapped or unseen water from the car's various classic nooks and crannies. The combination of the towel and the mini blower seemed to work well, so was also put to use on the fiddly wire wheels, which would have been a nightmare to towel dry alone in these conditions, so just directed the warm filtered air over the spokes, barrels and tyre walls until the vast majority of water had either been dispersed or evaporated. The sodden and still unfortunately dirty shuts were then given a decent wipe down with a fresh shampoo primed and wrung out towel, as although I was planning on giving them a dedicated clean with a soft brush earlier in the day, didn't want to open the doors in the rain and risk drenching the intricate interior any more than it already had been, so just wiped them over as best I could now that I was under cover so they'd at least look presentable at a glance. Another fresh general purpose towel or two were then put to use absorbing any overspray that had made its way onto the inside of the small windows, as these areas, which aren't necessarily designed to be the most weatherproof of parts, had been subject to a fair amount of water throughout the day, so were in desperate need of a good drying off. The last job of the day was to quickly remove the spare wheel on the back to mop the mess up from behind it, which hadn't yet fully drained away. And while I could have removed the wheel like this beforehand instead of cleaning it on the car, thought that was quite a unique shot, so intentionally kept it where it was. But here it was simply wiped down with one last towel to remove any lingering suds and rinse water before being replaced. So I could then call it a day to grab some comparative aftershots before the mass exodus of Morgan staff from the car park opposite, which I'd been warned was imminent. So dressings, polishes and protectants were effectively ruled out on the day, as this is currently a test mule destined for further development, so there was still plenty of bits that could have done with further attention, like the bright work, wire wheels and shuts. However, I think that considering the state of the car at the start, the all-new aluminium chassis Plus 4 came up surprisingly well with essentially just a wash, and was thankfully no longer sporting much of the original 4,000 miles worth of dirt. Now, because the whole thing was a bit last minute, there wasn't much time for me to prepare. However, despite that and the miserable forecast I was faced with, still thought it was worth travelling down to capture some quintessential shots. And I'm glad I did, as I've now got a far greater understanding and appreciation of what these cars are about. So once again, cheers to the guys at Morgan for the invite, and of course to you for watching, and I'll be back, I suspect, with something slightly more modern looking next time.